Hello, and welcome to this Ethical Dilemma in Science, where we're going to take a look at the concerns associated with preventing and treating a new disease. So, if we're taking a look at this, 2019, 2020, and now we're in 2021, we've been in the midst of a pandemic for the last 14, 15 months now at this point. Seems a whole lot longer, maybe even not quite that long. But the question is, if we look kind of at the medical history of the world over the last 35 years, what we can see is that there are novel infectious diseases that are continuing to emerge. These are diseases that may have existed previously that we did not know about, and as humankind expands out into other areas, we come into contact with some type of organism, a reservoir, it's referred to in virology, but some type of organism that is harboring the disease in some way, and that disease jumps to a human and becomes a zoonotic disease, becomes a disease that is now infectious in the human. And if it's a new disease, it becomes very, very difficult to treat because in many cases, because it's new, because it's novel, we don't have an immune system response to it. We don't have the kind of structures within our body exposed to it and ready to fight it off. And that's why there is such a push for the COVID-19 vaccines right now, because we need to teach the body how to fight off the disease. Otherwise, it's learning to fight off the disease at the same time that disease is going kind of full-blown in a patient and potentially causing severe illness and possibly death. And so these are just a couple examples of diseases that have emerged over the last 35 years. And these are some big ones that people have heard about probably and are really kind of scary because they have the potential to be very, very dangerous and life-threatening for patients. And so we've seen them emerging in the past, and we will continue to see new and novel infectious diseases emerging into the future. So what is it we're going to do? Are we going to go into lockdown every time a new disease emerges? Because new diseases are going to require treatment. And in order to be able to treat the disease, we need to be able to develop some type of drug that will, work at, killing the pathogen, the disease-causing agent, or, building up your immune system so that you're stronger and able to fight it off, or, in some way, affecting the pathogen so it isn't surviving as well. It weakens the pathogen so that your body is able to fight it off. Now, the traditional drug discovery timeline, you take a look at it, this is kind of really optimal. We're looking at, maybe 6 years on this diagram coming from the FDA. Realistically, it could be 10 or 20 years of research in a laboratory setting before we even start to think about applying it to a patient. And so we're going to be doing a lot of chemical experiments to understand the pharmacological properties of the drug, how it's synthesized, how it's reacting within the body, different things like that, what it may be interacting with. A lot of preclinical research involving testing the drugs on animal models to see if it's safe and potentially effective. And then ultimately, if it is something that is interesting after about 10 years of research, a firm is able to apply to go into clinical trials where they basically test the safety and efficacy, effectiveness of the drug. And that could take anywhere from normal circumstances 6 to 7, even a little bit longer as we're going through. And it's going to be working with a small number of volunteers, a medium level of volunteers, and a higher number of volunteers. Ultimately, if the evidence is supporting the effectiveness and the safety of the drug, it can then be approved for use at that point. Again, the FDA is going to evaluate the evidence to determine whether it's safe and effective. If we take a look at this, 15, 20 plus years to get from the need for a drug to a treatment, that is going to be very, very difficult. That's almost a full generation between emergence of a new disease and development and release of a drug. And so we need to come up with some alternatives to that traditional drug discovery timeline. So there are all kinds of alternatives to pharmacological discovery. Again, in 2021 now, looking back on 2020, we saw a lot of this occurring. COVID-19 was out there. COVID-19 was spreading through the population, is causing some people to have minimal symptoms, but other people were in life-threatening conditions. And sadly, at this point, over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID-19 or complications of COVID-19 in a little less than a year. And so some of the things that we've seen in the past are, you just need to be healthier. You need to, eat your vitamins and things like that. And so, we have an example here of a life extension mix, a series of capsules with a state-of-the-art multi-nutrient formula that is going to do something good for you. Other people are saying, well, if you have a healthy lifestyle, if you're active and you exercise, well, maybe that will allow you to stay healthy. And yeah, probably, the healthier you are when you get sick, the better your body is at fighting off a disease. And then finally, an alternative, and I'm not going to go with the one that was talked about with COVID-19, just because I think this one's a little more interesting. Viagra is a drug that was repurposed. It was a drug that was being investigated for the treatment of chest pain, and it was moderately effective at doing that, but there were better things available for the treatment of chest pain. But when they tried to get the drug back from the people involved with the clinical trials, they really didn't want to give it back because they had discovered a side effect, something that had not been kind of intended or thought about in the treatment of chest pain. But now we have Viagra, I mispronounce it, sildenafil citrate, as an erectile dysfunction treatment. So again, a drug that has been approved previously can be repurposed for a different condition, a different treatment paradigm. And that would greatly accelerate the availability of a drug because you don't have to go through the safety protocols. You just have to be able to show that it's effective in treating that new disease. And so the question is, does it matter if the proposed treatment works if there's no better treatment being available? There are things called placebos. I think most of us have heard about placebos. They're like sugar capsules or sugar tablets. And there's pretty good evidence that there's a placebo effect, that if you go to a doctor and the doctor says to you, okay, yeah, what you have is this condition and I've got what's going to treat you. This is going to work really well. It may take a day or two, but you're going to start feeling better right away at that point. You're not going to have a whole lot of pain at that point. The pain's going to get better and ultimately hopefully go away. But even if it doesn't go away completely, it's going to be much more manageable. And here they are. And you can actually buy placebo tablets. This is a company out of New York. And it basically has kind of inert ingredients. It's got a little bit of sugar and some other things that are in it as preservatives. But there's good evidence that there is a placebo effect in people. And so if the doctor has confidence that that treatment is going to help you, the patient feels good about it, they go into it with a positive attitude, and in many cases, there is an improvement of their situation. Still, without a medically viable or medically explainable treatment paradigm, it's just kind of a mind-body connection that allows some patients to get a benefit, even though there's not an active ingredient within it. So if they have the possibility of getting a placebo effect, does it matter if they're taking a placebo if nothing else is available? And that's a good ethical question. But I would pose the counter argument to you. that, if somebody is taking a placebo and getting a moderate effect or even a mild effect from that, are they going to be likely to try a better treatment, a different treatment later on? And so they could potentially be trapped in a placebo treatment as opposed to going for a better treatment when it becomes available. Is the supplier of this placebo or of this kind of alternative treatment taking advantage of the patient? There was a lot of information last year in 2020 about COVID-19 claims and treatments, and a lot of people took advantage of people that were afraid of COVID-19 with very good reason. But they took advantage of them. They got their money and gave them basically nothing in return. Is that ethical? And so how do we know whether or not these claims are going to be true? 125 years ago or so, you would see people kind of going around the countryside selling snake oil as this cure-all that will, treat your arthritis, give you digestive health and alertness and all kinds of other things. Chances are they, probably too good to be true. Probably not going to cure all possible ailments. And there were situations where sometimes these snake oils were actually making people much, much worse. And so we developed the Food and Drug Administration in the early 1930s as a response to getting more reliable, more predictable, safer medications and food products that were available to human beings. But in order to do that, we need to decide, do we just evaluate what the claim is, or do we have to evaluate some information? And so what the Food and Drug Administration does is that they evaluate the evidence of drug safety and effectiveness. And again, this is a slide kind of similar to what we looked at a couple slides ago, where much of the work is being done by the sponsor company, the pharmaceutical company, or the drug developer, and they're going to be doing experiments either on rats, kind of preclinical, or on humans during these clinical trials to be able to collect the information on the safetiness and effectiveness of their treatment for making the disease condition better, maybe put it in remission, or at least alleviate some of the symptoms. All of that information, sometimes thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pages of information, then goes to the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and they evaluate it and then present that information to a panel, and they make a decision as to whether or not they will grant approval for the use of that drug in a treatment. There's still expedited review programs that will speed up the process. So not 20 years, but a much shorter period of time. But they still require evidence of both the safety and effectiveness of a proposed new treatment. But these expedited review processes are there if they're treating a serious or life-threatening condition, and there's a good evidence that even though they haven't gone all the way to the cure of the disease or to the end of the disease process, there's a surrogate endpoint that says, things are going well. If there's a serious disease with an unmet medical need, COVID-19 was a serious medical condition with no effective treatment early on in 2020. And so that would be eligible for this expedited review, as well as if there are significant advancements of this treatment over existing treatments. They can go into an expedited review process. Now, the normal review process could take anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half or 2 years. The expedited review processes, they've been trying to get them down on the order of about 45 to 60 days. So with this introduction to our unit, here's some questions to consider. Should a patient be allowed access to an unapproved treatment for a life-threatening disease if no other option is available? Should a patient in a clinical trial continue to receive a medication even if the clinical trial ends after showing that the drug is safe but not effective in treating the disease? That's the example with the Viagra. If a medication is approved for use elsewhere in the world, should American patients be able to get access to the drug? Should we be able to order it and have it shipped to us, even though it hasn't been approved within the United States? So hopefully you're going to enjoy these ethical dilemmas in science as we go through this course. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Thank you and have a great day.